Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Speak and Feel English podcast, the place where language meets confidence and communication becomes natural. I am Mia, and as always, I am joined by my co-host Ethan, who is ready to dive deep into another important topic in everyday English.
Thank you, Mia. It is always a pleasure to be here, especially because today's topic sounds simple, but actually causes confusion even among advanced learners. We are going to talk about how to use to and for in English, two small words that carry a surprising amount of meaning and structure in conversation, writing, and professional communication.
Exactly. And what makes this topic interesting is that learners often feel they understand both words individually, yet when they speak, they hesitate and wonder which one fits the situation better. That hesitation can interrupt fluency, and today our goal is to remove that uncertainty by exploring how these words function in real contexts.
A good place to begin is by recognizing that to often shows direction, movement, or a relationship between one thing and another. When you say, "I am sending this email to my manager," you are showing where the action is directed. The focus is on the receiver of the action, the destination of communication, or the endpoint of movement.
That is a strong starting point. If we expand on that idea, to frequently connects actions with their targets. For instance, in a workplace context, someone might say, "I explained the proposal to the client," or "I presented the data to the team." In each example, the word to indicates who receives the explanation or presentation, which makes the sentence structured and precise.
Now, if we shift our attention to for, we notice a different type of relationship. Instead of direction, for usually expresses purpose, benefit, or reason. When someone says, "This report is for the client," the meaning is not about movement toward the client, but about the intended beneficiary. The report exists to serve the client's needs.
That difference between direction and purpose is fundamental. Consider the two sentences, "I brought coffee to Sarah," and "I brought coffee for Sarah." In the first, the emphasis is on delivery. In the second, the emphasis is on intention. Maybe Sarah has not even received the coffee yet, but it was purchased with her in mind.
Yes, and this distinction becomes even clearer in professional settings. Imagine a team leader saying, "Please send this document to the legal department," which focuses on the action of sending. Compare that with, "Please prepare this document for the legal department," which highlights the purpose of preparation rather than the act of delivery.
Another helpful way to understand the difference is by thinking about time relationships. For often appears when we talk about duration, such as, "I worked on this project for 3 months," or "She stayed in New York for a week." In these examples, for tells us how long something lasts, which is a role that to does not play. That is true, and it shows how for frequently answers the question why or how long, while to answers the question where or toward whom. When learners begin to connect each word with the type of question it answers, their choices become more natural and less mechanical. Let us also talk about how to works with verbs, because this is another place where it appears constantly. In English, we often use to before the base form of a verb to create what we call the infinitive, as in to learn, to improve, or to communicate. For instance, someone might say, "I want to improve my presentation skills," where to improve expresses the intended action.
And that structure is incredibly common in professional and academic environments. A manager might say, "We need to increase productivity," or a student might say, "I hope to graduate next year." In each case, to connects intention with action, which makes it a core element of expressing goals and plans.
Meanwhile, for often works with nouns rather than verbs when describing purpose. If someone says, "This training is for new employees," the focus is on who benefits from the training. The sentence does not describe an action in progress, but rather explains the reason the training exists.
Right, and we can even combine both words in the same idea to highlight their different roles. For instance, we organize this workshop for new employees to help them understand company policy. Here, for shows the intended group, while to introduces the purpose of helping them understand.
That example beautifully demonstrates how the two words cooperate rather than compete. When learners recognize that to and for each have their own function, they stop treating them as interchangeable and start using them strategically.
Before we move forward, I think it is worth emphasizing that mastering these small distinctions can dramatically improve clarity.
In business communication, sending a message to the wrong person or preparing something for the wrong audience can create misunderstandings. Precision with prepositions reflects professionalism. Absolutely. And as we continue this conversation, we will explore more nuanced cases, including common mistakes, subtle meaning shifts, and examples from everyday life in the United States, where these prepositions appear naturally in speech, emails, and meetings.
Mia, I think the best way to deepen understanding is to step into real-life conversational situations. When learners hear how these prepositions function in authentic dialogue, they begin to recognize patterns instead of memorizing isolated rules.
I completely agree, because language is rarely learned through theory alone. Let us imagine a typical workplace morning. Someone walks into the office and says, "I brought these documents to the meeting." Here, the focus is clearly on movement, on physically transferring something from one place to another. The word to shows direction and endpoint.
Now compare that with someone saying, "I prepared these documents for the meeting." The meaning shifts immediately. We are no longer talking about where the documents are going. Instead, we are talking about why they exist. The preparation happened with the meeting in mind as its purpose.
This difference becomes even more noticeable in service-related contexts. Suppose a colleague says, "I made a reservation for our client." That sentence emphasizes benefit because the reservation exists to serve the client's needs. But if someone says, "I sent the reservation details to our client," the action is about communication and delivery.
That is a great example because it shows how the same situation can require both words depending on the stage of the action. First, something is done for someone as a benefit, and later something is sent to them as a transfer of information.
Exactly. And this pattern appears constantly in professional emails. For example, an employee might write, "I created this summary for you to review," combining both words in one sentence. The summary exists for the person's benefit, while to review expresses the intended action they should take next.
Another common situation appears in customer service. Imagine a representative saying, "I will connect you to our support specialist." Here, to indicates the transfer of communication, but the same representative might also say, "I will find a solution for you," where the focus is on helping the customer.
It is fascinating how the listener's attention shifts depending on the preposition. To directs attention toward the path of the action, while for directs attention toward the reason behind it. Once learners start noticing that difference, their sentences become more intentional and expressive.
Let us also discuss a frequent learner mistake involving gifts, because this comes up constantly. People often hesitate between saying, "I bought this gift to my friend," and "I bought this gift for my friend." The correct choice is for, because the purchase was made with the friend as the beneficiary.
Exactly. And only after the gift is given would we use to. At that moment, someone might say, "I gave the gift to my friend." The act of buying uses for, while the act of giving uses to. One describes intention, the other describes transfer.
This distinction also applies in education. A teacher might say, "I prepared extra exercises for the class," focusing on the benefit to students. Later, the teacher might say, "I handed the worksheets to the class," focusing on the distribution of materials.
Yes, and even outside professional or academic contexts, the difference appears in everyday speech. Someone might say, "I cooked dinner for my family," emphasizing care and intention, while later saying, "I served dinner to my family," emphasizing the act of delivering the food.
When we analyze these examples together, a pattern emerges. For often appears when the speaker wants to show consideration, planning, or usefulness. It reflects the thought behind an action. Meanwhile, to shows the actual movement or connection between people, objects, or information.
That observation is especially important in business communication, where tone matters. Writing, "I completed this analysis for you" sounds supportive and collaborative, while writing, "I sent the analysis to you" simply reports an action. Both are correct, but they communicate slightly different attitudes.
And those subtle differences influence how messages are received. When professionals choose the right preposition, they not only avoid grammatical errors, but also conveys clarity, efficiency, and even respect for the audience.
Another interesting point involves requests. When someone says, "Could you explain this to me?" the focus is on receiving information. But if they say, "Could you explain this for me?" the meaning changes slightly, suggesting they want the person to handle the explanation on their behalf.
That is a perfect illustration of how a single word can change responsibility within a sentence. With to, the speaker wants to understand directly. With for, they may want assistance or substitution.
I think it is the perfect moment to explore some of the more abstract uses of to and for, because up to this point we have mostly discussed physical movement, intention, and benefit. However, in fluent English, these prepositions also help express goals, responsibilities, and emotional relationships.
That is true, and one of the first advanced uses learners encounter involves goals and ambitions. For example, someone might say, I am studying to become a project manager. In this sentence, to introduces the objective or desired outcome. It connects present effort with a future result, which makes it extremely common in discussions about career plans and education.
Exactly. And that structure appears constantly in professional environments. People often say things like, I am working hard to improve my leadership skills, or we are expanding the company to reach new markets. In each case, to introduces the aim of the action, showing the direction in a metaphorical sense rather than a physical one.
Now, if we shift to for, we notice it frequently appears when discussing responsibility or representation. For instance, someone might say, I am speaking for the entire team. The meaning here is that the speaker represents others, not that they are moving toward them. The preposition signals advocacy or substitution.
That is an important nuance because it reflects social roles. Imagine a manager saying, I am responsible for client relations. In that sentence, for connects the person with their duty. It expresses accountability, which is why we often see it in job descriptions and professional evaluations.
And this same pattern applies to emotional expressions as well. Consider the sentence, I am grateful for your support. The word for links the emotion with its cause. Without it, the sentence would feel incomplete. English relies heavily on for when describing appreciation, concern, or sympathy.
Yes, and in contrast, to often appears when we talk about reactions directed towards someone. For example, she was kind to her colleagues, or he apologized to his supervisor. In these cases, to shows the recipient of the action or attitude, even though there is no physical movement involved.
That distinction between cause and direction is subtle but powerful. If you say, I am thankful for your help, you identify the reason for your gratitude. If you say, I spoke to you yesterday, you identify the person who received the communication. Each preposition anchors the sentence differently.
Another advanced use appears in expressions of suitability or compatibility. For example, someone might say, this software is useful for small businesses, meaning it benefits that group. But if they say, this software is easy to learn to use, the to introduces the action connected with the subject.
We can also see this in performance evaluations. A supervisor might say, you are well suited to this position, where to connects the person with the role. But they might also say, this role is perfect for you, where for highlights the benefit or appropriateness from another perspective.
That comparison illustrates how perspective shapes preposition choice. To often shows alignment or connection, while for shows suitability or advantage. Understanding this helps learners interpret feedback more accurately in professional contexts.
Let us also talk about instructions, because these appear everywhere in business communication. A manager might say, I need you to finish this report by Friday. The phrase to finish indicates the expected action. Meanwhile, the same manager might say, this deadline is important for our clients, where for explains the significance.
Yes, and when we combine both prepositions in longer sentences, their roles become even clearer. For example, we scheduled this training for new employees to help them adapt quickly. Here, for introduces the group benefiting from the training, while to help introduces the intended outcome.
This layered structure is common in professional writing because it allows the speaker or writer to show purpose and audience simultaneously. It makes communication efficient and precise, which is why mastering these small words can elevate someone's overall fluency.
I also think it is worth mentioning that native speakers rarely think consciously about these choices, but they sense when something's slightly off. That intuition develops through repeated exposure, which is why listening to conversations, meetings, and presentations can be so helpful for learners.
Absolutely, and one practical strategy is to pay attention to collocations or common word partnerships. For instance, we usually say apply for a job, not apply to a job, but we say submit your application to the company. Both appear in the same process, yet they use different prepositions because the relationships differ.
That example perfectly demonstrates how context determines the correct choice. When you apply, you are seeking something, which aligns with for. When you submit something, you are directing it somewhere, which aligns with to. Recognizing that logic helps learners remember the difference naturally.
Mia, I think this is the perfect moment to focus on common mistakes learners make with to and for, because this is where even confident speakers sometimes lose clarity. Often the issue is not grammar knowledge, but automatic habits formed from translating directly from one's first language.
That is very true. And one of the most frequent mistakes appears when learners talk about reasons versus results. For example, someone might say, I went to the store for buy groceries, which sounds almost correct but is not quite natural. In English, after for, we usually use a noun or gerund form, so the correct version would be, I went to the store to buy groceries, where to introduces the purpose expressed by the verb.
Exactly, because to connects the action of going with the intended result. If we wanted to keep for, we would say, I went to the store for groceries, where groceries functions as a noun. This distinction between verb purpose and noun purpose is a reliable guide for choosing the right preposition.
Another common confusion arises in workplace communication. People sometimes write emails saying, I explained you the process, which misses the preposition entirely. The correct structure is, I explained the process to you, because the explanation is directed toward a recipient.
Yes, and interestingly, when we use for with explanation, the meaning shifts. If someone says, I explained the situation for you, it suggests they spoke on your behalf or clarified something so you would not have to. That subtle shift in responsibility is exactly why these prepositions matter.
Let us consider another pair that often causes confusion. I made this cake to you versus I made this cake for you. Only the second sentence sounds natural, because the cake exists for your benefit. If we use to, we would instead say, I gave the cake to you, which focuses on the act of delivery. That example illustrates a broader pattern. Creation typically pairs with for, while transfer pairs with to. We create something for someone, but we send, give, or show something to someone. Once learners internalize that pattern, many mistakes disappear instantly.
Another tricky case appears with invitations. Someone might say, I invited her for the meeting, which is understandable but not precise. The more accurate phrasing is, I invited her to the meeting, because the invitation directs her toward an event or location.
However, for could still appear in that context if the meaning shifts slightly. For example, I prepared an agenda for the meeting, where the agenda exists for the meeting's purpose. The difference is subtle but logical when we analyze the relationship between the elements in the sentence.
Yes, and learners often benefit from asking themselves a quick mental question. Am I describing movement or direction, or am I describing purpose or benefit? If the answer is direction, to is usually correct. If the answer is purpose, for is usually the better choice.
This strategy works particularly well in professional writing. Imagine you are drafting a message that says, I scheduled this call to discuss the proposal. With a small correction, it becomes, I scheduled this call to discuss the proposal. The change makes the sentence sound natural and polished.
And if we wanted to use for in that sentence, we could say, I scheduled this call for the proposal discussion, where the phrase becomes a noun expression. Again, the difference lies in whether we are introducing an action or a purpose expressed as a thing.
Another mistake appears when people talk about time expressions. Some learners say, I will stay here 2 weeks, but English requires for when expressing duration. The correct sentence is, I will stay here for 2 weeks, because we are describing how long the action lasts.
Yes, and to would only appear with time if we are indicating a range, such as from Monday to Friday. That example highlights how each preposition occupies its own territory in the language, and confusion often comes from overlapping concepts in translation.
I think it is also useful to remind listeners that mistakes with prepositions are completely normal. Even advanced learners refine this skill gradually, and the best way to improve is to notice patterns rather than memorize long lists of rules.
Absolutely. And one effective technique is to keep a small record of phrases you encounter frequently, such as send it to me, prepare this for tomorrow, apply for the role, or talk to your supervisor. Over time, these patterns become automatic.
As we move into the final part of our discussion, I think this is the perfect time to bring everything together and reflect on what we have explored so far. Throughout this conversation here in the United States studio, we have examined how two small prepositions, to and for, play a surprisingly powerful role in shaping meaning, tone, and clarity in English communication.
That is exactly right, because what began as a simple grammar topic turned into a broader discussion about relationships within language. We saw that to usually signals direction, connection, or intended action. It points towards a receiver, a destination, or a goal. Meanwhile, for typically expresses purpose, benefit, duration, or responsibility. It explains why something exists or who it supports.
One of the most important insights is that these words rarely compete with each other. Instead, they perform different jobs in a sentence. When learners stop viewing them as interchangeable and begin seeing them as tools with distinct functions, their fluency improves naturally.
Yes, and we also discussed how this distinction appears in professional communication. Saying, "I prepared this report for the client" highlights purpose, while saying, "I sent the report to the client" highlights delivery. Both are correct, but they emphasize different stages of the same process.
One of the most important insights involves structure. When we use verbs to describe purpose, we typically choose to, as in to improve, to explain, or to achieve. When we use nouns to describe benefit or intention, we often choose for, as in for the team, for the project, or for the meeting.
That pattern alone can guide many decisions. If you are introducing an action someone will take, to is usually appropriate. If you are introducing the reason something exists or the person it helps, for is usually the better choice.
We also talked about emotional and social meanings. English speakers often say, "I am grateful for your help," or "I feel responsible for this task," where for connects feelings to causes. On the other hand, they say, "I spoke to her," or "I apologize to them," where to identifies the receiver of the action.
Those examples show that prepositions are not just grammar markers. They reflect relationships between people, intentions, and outcomes. When learners understand that deeper logic, their communication becomes more natural and confident.
I think it is also important to remind listeners that mastering prepositions is a gradual process. Even highly proficient speakers continue refining their understanding through exposure, practice, and feedback. The goal is not perfection overnight, but steady improvement over time.
Absolutely. One practical tip is to notice how these words appear in everyday phrases. Pay attention when you hear expressions like talk to, send to, apply for, prepare for, or wait for. These repeated patterns train your ear and eventually guide your speech automatically.
Another helpful approach is to pause briefly before speaking or writing and ask yourself a simple question. Am I describing movement or connection, or am I describing purpose or benefit? That small moment of reflection can prevent many common mistakes.
And most importantly, remember that communication is about clarity, not just correctness. Choosing the right preposition helps your listener or reader understand your intention immediately, which is essential in both professional and personal conversations.
Well, Ethan, this has been a rich and practical discussion, and I hope our listeners now feel more confident about using to and for in their everyday English.
I hope so too, Mia. These small words may seem simple, but mastering them can make a big difference in how natural and precise your English sounds.
Thank you to everyone who spent time with us today on Speak and Feel English. If you found this discussion helpful and want to keep improving your communication skills, make sure you subscribe to the channel, explore our other podcast episodes, and continue learning with us.
We appreciate you listening, and we look forward to bringing you more conversations that help you speak clearly, confidently, and naturally.
Until next time, keep practicing, keep listening, and keep speaking with confidence.